money to people who are asking for it on the street is appropriate or not. And there was quite a conversation back and forth. And one woman just said, it isn't what we do, it's that we continue to do it. And, it doesn't matter that, trying to decide where is the best place to give, but just the fact that we give can change us. And so I think for me and we had a little bit of a side conversation here too, is we can get very stuck in our heads, and we need, as I was mentioning, pauses before, but whatever that is for each of us, that opportunity to come into a different space within ourselves. And Richard Rohr often speaks of great struggle or great love that can sort of strike us into a new place within. And so when you're talking about that place of how do we get to that place of defamiliarization, it's sort of being in whatever it is we're in our lives, whether that's deep love or deep struggle or just deep silence. But we have so many things in our lives that take us out of those places. But if we can remain in those places, that maybe that's where we hit those movements.
I'm hearing kind of an interesting paradox there of the way in which, one can distance oneself from one's own experience, which sounds like defamiliarization a little bit, in a way that is not attentive to the experience itself and that rejects that experience as meaningful and rich. And that part of what I hear you saying is spending time in that experience is rich, and that it defamiliarizes the kind of run of the ordinary, right? In the sense that there is no richness here. There's nothing I can give in this circumstance. There is something, right? And that can be found. So there's kind of like a paradox of defamiliarizing the familiar, which is valuable in its familiarity. Okay, big tautology. I hope you enjoyed that.
All right, I'm going to bring this to an end soon, but I'll take a couple more comments.
I don't know if these constructs would be helpful, but what's coming clear to me is the whole notion of stages in our biological life, and the whole notion how survival and what we need to do for ourselves, or the promotion of ourself, the growth of ourself, is quite different in all these stages. When we think of young children in high school, adolescence, and then adulthood, and then late adulthood or elderhood, there are different drives, there are different, our own biology dictates different percentages of time on different aspects of our lives. I just want to throw that out there, that I think, and that's why this gentleman who mentioned about retirement, and why I keep going, that Jung, for example, is very much into stages of a person's spiritual development and what should happen in latter life. And the Hindus, of course, in no longer being a householder, which means part of the community, and therefore able to leave the network of the community and work on self. But that work on self could be teaching, which is a form of activism, So I'd like to see that notion of stages of a human life and how that applies to all of this.
Thank you. I hear that as part of what we were speaking about earlier in terms of rhythm. The rhythms of, I was speaking of it in terms of breath, but obviously these are rhythms of stages of life as well.
Okay, I'm going to make this the last comment because we should take a break, and then for about 15 minutes, and everybody can get refreshed. And then we'll come back for a closing discussion.
Thanks. I don't even know where this fits, because it goes all the way back to the first gentleman's back here comment about the Jesuit, the shift and the Reformation, and then the Jesuits finding an institutional way to combine these two. And when you talked about that, I was like, okay, it seems like there's certain times in history or times when it's right for a new movement or shift into this way. And then it links to that gentleman over here who talked about how being in a different culture can shift your consciousness, really, or shift your familiarization. So, sorry, this is a long roundabout thing, but my real question had been earlier, well, what is it happening now, today, that might shift our way into valuing this combination again? And it really struck me that maybe this whole idea of culture and how we link that to globalization. And what's happening, I see with my kids. My kids have such an extremely different upbringing than I did. I share with Daniel the mixed blessing of having grown up in a developing country as a child of missionary kids. So exposed to a very different culture, many different cultures in my upbringing. My kids have lived mostly in Edmonton their whole life. But I see them continually, I think young people now are continually exposed to different cultures, different ways of thinking, a very global way that I think in many ways I see has shifted the sort of swept the carpet out from under our culture in many ways, because we understand that our way is not the only way. Oh, surprise, surprise. So I don't know, it's just giving me a lot of hope. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because I thought, to me, that's such a thing of hope, right? If it puts us into a different place or seeing ourselves in a different way, maybe this whole shifting consciousness of awareness of different cultures can be a real sign of a shift or change. I don't know if I communicated that.
That was interesting. I mean, can defamiliarizing occur on a social level for a whole cultural group? All right, let's take a break for about 15 minutes. You can get more of Steve's delicious tea, and then we'll come back and Daniel will lead the concluding discussion.
I belong to a Muslim tradition where we meditate between 4 and 5 in the morning. But one of our important teachings is prayer without action is pride.
Do you have any comment on that, Dan?
That's right. I feel like it would be proud to say something at this point. The one thing that has struck me, I was talking with David about this during the break, about the first part of our conversation, is that we haven't talked too much about the traditions that have shaped and given structure to people's practices of contemplation. And when you opened with your comment, Azim, about I come from a tradition where we meditate between 4 and 5 in the morning, there are rich traditions that inform our contemplative practice, and perhaps one of our conversations could be, what does inform that practice for you? What's a rich? Is it a tradition? Is it a philosophy? Is it what has given shape to these, if they're moments of the defamiliarization or the decontextualization, or to what has given a meaningful form for contemplation, silence, theory, discernment?
Good afternoon. I'm Mary, and I would like to say that the part that I find left out of this communication has been on creativity, that process of creating, be it writing, or sculpture, or painting, or working with photography, or just any process of creating, both as a means of contemplation and as a means of communication and as a means of activism. So I'd like some feedback.
Well, certainly. I mean, just to back up a little bit, one of the core understandings of spirituality for me is that it is that we had the word eros before, the energy that rises up, and it's often that creative energy. For different people, it's going to find different avenues of expression. But that creative force is what energizes activity, activism. And that is generative and projective. In other words, it's not just inward and contemplative in that inward sense. It's communicative, as you say, whether that's an art form or an expressive communicative form, or if it's an organizational form, right? There's so many elements to this. I wonder if there's a way we can connect this comment with Aziz's. Prayer without action is pride. Is there a way that the contemplation without that creative expression is some form of pride? Is, you know, the way that it becomes an aggrandizement of the self rather than something that's that's outward, that's aimed beyond one's own kind of sphere.
Does anybody have a comment on that, right?
Hi, I'm just curious how you're explaining it. You were describing it as though, this is going to come out wrong, you're describing what you were saying as though pride were a horrible thing or a bad thing. And I don't necessarily believe that that's always the case. I mean, if there's anything wrong with finding an inner peace or doing something through creative process for nothing but yourself, as this gentleman was explaining too, like even looking within yourself to do good for the feeling of nothing more than making yourself feeling good. I don't know, that's being proud of that, that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that can fix society in a lot of, maybe a positive way. Maybe I'm sounding a little selfish here, I don't know, but.
Maybe we could, okay.
I'm going to assume that this gentleman here is maybe equating the word pride with satisfaction, and that those two words are closely related, and that there's nothing wrong with being satisfied with something you've been able to accomplish through creativity. But touching on that creativity issue, I was thinking of that too, and that word really aligned well with this whole discussion, because to me creativity, and not just in what we see as the fine art sense, but so much of what most people do, they choose to do because it ignites their creative sense. I mean, if you make a loaf of bread, you're creating something. So, and that creativity is really what marries the contemplativeness with the activism, and so that it's not always about being an activist, or but your creativity really marries those two things together, whether or not it's intentional. Like, not every artist goes out there to be an activist, but that is just the end result regardless. That's about it.
This reminds me of, and I was connecting the creative with inherently deeply embedded in what I understand spirituality to be. We've spoken of Rolheiser's work a few times this afternoon. He talks about the opposite of spirituality not being something like atheism or whatever, but being passivity, like being static. I think his image of the non-spiritual is, you know, beer intravenously on the couch, you know. So the whole thing of that generative impulse and the satisfactions of, and the satisfaction of working and making connections that are enabling. That's really deeply grounding. You know, there's richness there that I think is really important. I wonder if we could go back to Azim to ask if, in the tradition that you're speaking of, if these reflections on the word pride and relationship with to prayer and the contemplative make sense.
Well, first of all, the word pride here refers to people who come and just pray, and it says, in addition to prayer, there must be action, because otherwise that is just seen as pride. So the prayer is important and action is equally important.
So would this be about the kind of performative idea of